California is very well represented. But yeah, over to you, Cheryl.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the discussion on Let's Talk About AI and Equity. The session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel afterwards. To use Zoom captions, locate the closed caption button at the bottom and select to turn the live transcript on or off. If you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. I will now turn the session over to our presenter, Kristina from Catalyst IT in New Zealand.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, for this introduction. I'm really happy to be here with everybody at the third annual Peralta Online Equity Conference. And it is wonderful to have all of you in here, in this room, so that we can talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and how it relates to equity, and get out of the hype cycle that I think many around the world are still in, because of course it is very exciting, but I feel like we do also need to look at the other side and look at how things pertain to equity, to learning, and where we might want to be a bit cautious. So this session is not going to give you a full introduction to AI. I will lay a little bit of groundwork, but then I do want to get into the discussion with you. So please get ready to have your finger on the keyboard or feel free to unmute yourself, because it is the second day of the Peralta conference, and therefore we are in the discussion day, so that we do want to discuss and not just do a presentation. I will keep an eye on the chat, so please do feel free to put things in there. We will also be using Answer Garden, and then also an activity in a document where you can work on your own. And so the first activity already. What comes to your mind when you hear AI? And in this case, it is artificial intelligence. And the link to that activity is now in the chat for you. It's in Answer Garden, where I'd like you to answer the question of what comes to mind when you hear artificial intelligence. So when you're on the Answer Garden page, you can just type your answer in there of 40 characters and send it off. So just a little bit of time for people to put their thoughts in. And as you can see, you can put in either single words or also short phrases. So we have our first responses. And the biggest response, so multiple people have said robots. And the second item was generative AI like ChatGPT, where new content is generated by the artificial intelligence. We also have cautious optimism and potential, excitement, faculty development, a resource, algorithms, then opportunity and risk, so both the good and the bad in one, inspiration, change, and change can go also both ways, hell as one example. It's a whole new world. The future is now. Another generative AI, science fiction, need to add an AI policy to a syllabus. Yep. Auto captions, as demonstrated in this session, because Cheryl turned it on. So accessibility, secretive, intellectual property, and wow in general. So thank you so much for these immediate reactions to what you think when you hear AI, what comes to mind immediately. And that really also demonstrates where I want to take this session with you and look at the positive and also look at the things that we might want to consider that in order to not fall into the trap of just the shiny new tool. So if we are taking a step back very briefly and look at what artificial intelligence is, a common definition is that it is intelligence, so perceiving, synthesizing, and inferring information demonstrated by machines, as opposed to the intelligence displayed by non-human animals or by humans. And artificial intelligence is actually not something very new. It goes back all the way to the 1950s, and we've actually have been dealing with AI ourselves for a very long time already. So just think about web search engines and also recommendation systems. So if you have a tool that says, oh, you've shopped for this, you might also like that, or you watched this movie, or you watched these 3 different movies, you might also like to watch this, or you're listening to X, Y, and Z. So we think you might also like to listen to this type of music. And then from there, you explore further. Then also understanding human speech. If you have an Apple phone, you might be talking to Siri. If you have other devices, you might be talking to them in order to give them simple commands, or even when you talk to your bank or when you're on hold with another business. Often, instead of punching in numbers into the phone, you can now say words, and the system can understand them, or if they don't like your accent, often I do have problems with my German accent, then they might not be able to understand you, and you fall back to just punching in some numbers. But understanding human speech is also something that machine learning is involved in, and therefore also artificial intelligence. In New Zealand, for example, where I live, a colleague of mine created a machine learning algorithm that detects when somebody on the radio is speaking Te Reo Māori, in order to make it easier for the radio stations then to access funding, because funding is distributed depending on how much Te Reo is spoken in certain contexts. Then, of course, more recently, another different example of AI is self-driving cars that are now starting to take to the roads. And since end of November last year, generative artificial intelligence tools are probably on everybody's minds through the introduction of ChatGPT, and prior to that, also through the introduction of DALL-E by OpenAI. And there are definitely more ways of where we can encounter artificial intelligence, but I just wanted to focus on these briefly and now go more into kind of fiddling out the generative AI tools, because they, in a way, are the sometimes, for me at least, the more fascinating ones, but also really, really scary ones, because they are producing new content that can be indistinguishable to what a human would produce. And so there, of course, we have text generators like ChatGPT, where you give a prompt and then text comes out. And you can do something very similar also with images, so that you give a text prompt and it comes back with an image. There are increasingly also audio tools available where you just type text and an AI voice, Voices is out for you. And organizations use that for demonstration videos, for example. Or if you want to disguise that you have an accent, then you just have somebody else speak it. There's also possibilities where you can record your voice, sometimes even a very small snippet of it, and then the AI can learn your speech patterns and can produce text or can produce speech that sounds like you. You might have also seen that there is video AI, where you can generate just avatars itself that can then also either speak in your voice or in an artificial voice. And looking more at software development, there's also the possibility to generate code automatically based on previous inputs and by using the data that is in the corpus. And just as an example, as full disclosure, the outcomes that you see on the Peralta Equity Conference website for my session were actually generated with ChatGPT version 3.5. I used that to demonstrate how easy it is. So I put the abstract into ChatGPT, just said I'd like to have outcomes being displayed, and then it came up with them. The other thing that I've also noticed when I prepared for this presentation is that the tool that I use for my presentations now has an AI assistant included as well that is available when I type text. I can just click on the magic icon and then it gives me options. Whether I want to enhance the writing, fix spelling and grammar, if I want to have 3 options to replace my current heading, make it shorter, make it longer, make it sound more casual, make it sound more professional, or translated it into one of the languages that are available. So that is a very recent development, and that does also use OpenAI on the backend in order to test it out. So I can altogether send, in this case, up to 150 prompts over and get a response back. So we'll see more and more of those integrations in everyday life. And I had a very brief Twitter chat with the developer of the tool that I'm using, slides.com. And he said that currently we cannot opt out of having the AI assistant available. However, it only becomes active when I actually choose one of the options that are presented on screen. So it's not that my text is immediately sent over to OpenAI whenever I type something into my presentations, but I do need to make a conscious choice. Which kind of really takes me into the AI promises. And that is where, of course, we see a lot of the hype come through these days. And that is that AI makes life easier. And that is certainly true. Very mundane things can just be handled by a machine. They can just summarize things very quickly for us and help with that. If you're looking at education, of course, it can support students and is also very much used for improving the accessibility, because as we see here in this session, a live transcript is being generated automatically. The transcript can also be displayed in different languages. So there's lots and lots of very, very good use cases for using artificial intelligence. And last but not least, it can also unleash the creativity of people, because thinking is just going to be taken further, and there are many, many other AI promises that can then also depend on the context where you're at. However, what I'd also like to look at actually is the other side. So what if we take our rose-tinted glasses off for a moment and see, well, is it always that rosy, that we have the AI, that it helps us, that it does good things? Well, at some point there is going to be an access issue, because everything does cost money. So at some point, organizations will ask for, well, now you need to pay to have access to the AI tool or to a better version of the AI, like in the case of OpenAI, that ChatGPT version based on GPT 3.5 is currently in the preview and accessible freely. But if you want to use the more powerful version, you do have to pay a monthly subscription fee. Then, of course, there's also the accuracy that comes in, and which is very closely tied to the biased models, because, of course, information is being fed into these into the data sets, but what has been fed into, where does the information come from, who is categorizing it, what are they using to categorize that data, and therefore, are certain people left out of it? There's a big data sovereignty question that is going on as well. Should everything go into the data? Should there be also one common data set, or are we going to see multiple data sets so that organizations, also groups of people, especially looking at indigenous peoples or vulnerable communities, can protect their data? On the other hand, if that data is not present in a corpus, then that corpus might have very biased and wrong information in there because it doesn't have access to the correct information. And also the whole idea around copyright and reuse permissions, because so far none of the artificial intelligence tools have asked creators whether they can use what has been published online. And while things are being published online, that doesn't mean that copyright shouldn't be respected. Other organizations or people use a Creative Commons license and attach that to their content. But when that is being fed into the data sets, it might not be able to be retrieved very easily. And it certainly isn't necessarily referenced to then at the end where the information is coming from. There's also the privacy issue, that there might be information might end up in a data set that you didn't want there, but you didn't have any control over it. Or in, like has already been reported in the media, is that confidential information was being put into ChatGPT, and then that is being used and being presented and information leaked. Only because some people might not realize that when they type something into the website, the company can actually use that input and use it as part of their content. And also sustainability. We do need to look at the environmental impact such new technology has in terms of energy use, water use, and also what the data sets grow much further. What does it impact? Where are we getting our information from? And there will very likely also be other concerns that we might want to look at. So what I'd like to invite you now is to take the annotation tool here in Zoom that you should be seeing at the top of your screen. Click Annotate and use a stamp and put your stamp next to the category: access, accuracy, biased models, copyright, reuse permissions, privacy, and sustainability, and indicate which area is of most concern to you. And you can use multiple stamps if you like, so that we just get an idea of where people's heads is. So we see lots around privacy, biased models, accuracy indexes. Teresa, I just see your comment. What can you not access?
The tiny URL with the materials for the session.
Okay. Oh, that is correct. Sorry about that. I'll put a different link in there. So, and in the chat, somebody said their Perplexity AI. That is one that I haven't yet heard of. If you want to share what that is all about, while I'll copy the link to all of the slides. So looking at the main concerns for you are, we are just counting, it looks like privacy has one of the biggest ones with 13 icons, and then it's probably a tie between accuracy, biased models, copyright, and reuse permissions. Does anybody want to talk about why the one or the ones they've selected is of most concern to them? Please do feel free to use the chat or also unmute your microphone.
Hi, my name is Daryl, and can I share?
Yes, please do go ahead.
So I just had my first experience of a student using ChatGPT to submit something. And I think it can be a good resource, especially if students are not well at writing and they want it, and they're interested in improving their writing skills. However, this student used it. I give my students what's known as reflective journals for them to reflect on what they learned for that week and, different things like that. So this student had submitted work before to me, and so I'm aware of her writing because, I read everything. So when I read this one submission, I was like, this is insane. This is written perfectly. But then I said, let me be sure it's not just me. Let me go back and look at another submission. And the writing was completely different. So for me, in that case, I want to know what students are taking away from what it is they're learning from the content and the materials in their own words. But students are now, I asked her, I said, did you use ChatGPT to submit this because it looks different from your other writings? And she said, yes, honestly, I did. I've just been overwhelmed and swamped, so I reminded her of academic integrity, presenting her own work or citing sources. So that's a big thing for me. The academic integrity is huge for me. So I guess that's why I selected the copyright and reuse permissions.
Yeah, so we are hearing that quite a bit, that it is becoming increasingly more difficult to see what students have written and whether it's their own writing or not, and that there are now detection tools that promise that they can detect what ChatGPT has written and what has come from a student, but they are not very accurate from what I'm seeing online. Because they falsely identify text as having come from an AI when it was actually a student's work. So we do need to take those things with a grain of salt. And as you have just mentioned, if you know how your student writes, then you can spot those things probably better yourself. But that might not really work in a very large class. If you have 600, 800 or 1,000 students, maybe multiple graders in their multiple markers, that they might not really see that in small classes. That could very well work. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing.
Can I add? I would be happy enough if my students use ChatGPT. We talk about using it. If they write something and then think it's a little bit choppy, it doesn't flow well, they put it in ChatGPT, they get another version, they look at that, combine them. Mm-hmm. I'd be happy with that. Where I would have problems is, as the other person maybe was hinting at, if it were an activity where they were supposed to use sources and they were supposed to accurately represent the sources. There, I wouldn't want them to be taking something from ChatGPT without it being clear what they took. But if it's just a reflection and they're using it to make their writing flow better, whatever, however that's to be interpreted, I guess I wouldn't care. Yeah.
Okay. That's it is kind of making it transparent, I think, also, Teresa, to say, okay, I did use a tool, because then you have different expectations on it and you can put it into context there. Yeah. Anybody else wants to share? I do see in the chat, I think folks across the board struggle with digital literacy. Just look at any news around any election. So I feel that biased models and accuracy is really important, so students don't accept it at face value. Yeah. And then also true, because ChatGPT produces hallucinations. Does anybody want to speak to that?
Sure, I can. That was me. The hallucinations are the made up references and sources that ChatGPT produces. If you ask it for its sources, now sometimes it will come up with correct ones, but sometimes it just completely fabricates every single thing all the way down to a fake ISBN number. And so those have now been termed hallucinations.
You're muted, Kristina.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I noticed that with the responses, with the references myself, that when I asked ChatGPT for particular, I'll just take the screen share for a moment, for particular references, that it wasn't actually giving the correct ones, but it might have combined an actual authors with a different title, and then come up with a completely new reference list there. And so that, of course, for accuracy is not really fantastic at all. What I'd like to do now for you, we've heard from a few people about their concerns that they have in regards to using artificial intelligence, but also the potential that it does have, and where it can be used really well. And so I'd like to give everyone now a few minutes time to think for yourself and take an activity where you can look at, and that is the link that hadn't been working earlier, that does now work. I'll just pop it also into the chat, just the long one here, where you pick a slide from the slide deck, or make a copy of it. There should be in plenty though, and state your concern and provide some details so that we can collect them a bit, and in this quiet activity give you the chance to think on your own and either think about any questions you have or any strategies that you think you could apply. And so just as an example for you, to see what I was envisaging is, for example, the AI concern is that confidential information can be leaked. And so details for that is we have to assume that anything entered into a tool could be collected and used by the company in other contexts, unless it's explicitly stated that this doesn't happen. And so strategies to deal with that concern, from my perspective, are to actually first make a conscious decision whether you are okay with the content that it could be shared, even if you don't want to immediately make it public. So for example, here in our Zoom room, I'm consciously aware of the fact that this is being recorded and that there's also a live transcript running along the side that is generated by an AI automatically. So I know that that information is going to be stored somewhere. And so I try not to say anything that I wouldn't also be willing to share publicly already anyway. Another strategy might be that you sanitize information before you share it into an AI tool, or only share content that you're happy to share publicly. So for example, if I record a video or record an interview and don't have an AI tool running while I'm recording the interview for a podcast, then what I would, and I can talk with a person, we might interrupt the interview, we might be stopping and starting talking about something that I'm going to cut out. And so before sending it off to an automatic transcription service, I would edit that episode and then only send what I really want to make public, so that any of our banter or something that they don't want to have made public doesn't even end up in a data corpus. Or a third strategy might be that I turn off an AI tool, or that you might ask or might give that as a strategy to your students who might be using something like Grammarly to turn it off when they are writing something confidential, so that it does not automatically go into the corpus. But then an open question for me is, what do you do though when you can't influence what is to be collected? So via the live transcript in a webinar. Because while the final transcript can be sanitized, the original content would already have been collected and therefore would go into a data set, and you can't take that out anymore. So how do we manage the balance between, in this case, accessibility and privacy and sending our data off? So I'd like for you to take a few minutes and we'll say about 5 minutes to pick a slide for yourself and jot down some of the strategies that you might have for one AI concern that you've already come across, or maybe if you haven't yet been able to think about strategies, to ask your open questions so that we can then think about some strategies of how you could deal with that. couple more minutes. Thank you so much for everybody who's been putting their thoughts into these slides. And there's the focus, which I had expected very much on writing, on the AI tools assisting with writing. Here we on screen, you can see one that says, I'm concerned about students misusing AI tools. I don't want them to become too dependent on them for writing. I want them to write for themselves to continue to develop critical thinking skills through writing. Critical thinking, some people also call it, now have a new literacy in there that is AI literacy, how to deal with it. And I think it was, yeah, and in another slide, one of you said, students missing out on the struggle and benefits of learning by using an AI tool instead. Because, of course, it is generated automatically for you, and then some students might not know how to deal with it, how to critically examine it. Does it have information that is based in research, or how did it come by that text? Because what we have to remember with the generative tools, in particular the large language models, of which GPT is one, that the text that is generated is predicted by what is typically expected as an answer. And so that comes down to how the model has been trained, where the biases lie. And therefore, we do need to give students tools on hand to deal with that. So, for example, here one strategy is mentioned that is spending time discussing the use of AI with students. Other strategies include, oh, that was the wrong one. I think it was 25, have a syllabus policy besides the open discussion. And also, yeah, speaking very openly with the students. But of course, there the open questions are AI detection tools sufficient? How do we prevent the use of AI? Because of course, it's not just since November that students have been using that. It's only come to the forefront, and it's only now being discussed. Other open questions were, are there appropriate uses for an AI tool that students can use? And so what I've seen educators do is that when they make it transparent that students can use AI tools, that they then reflect on that usage and might use it as a prompt to then research on it and see, is that also an answer that they would have gotten elsewhere? Do they agree with that output, or would they do things differently? Going to a more privacy, data collection and commercialization concern is the details are that this person has been thinking about the data that is being collected by generative tools and how it can be used to influence our behavior for commercial purposes, such as advertising, sales, and our emotions. And so strategies there could be federal privacy protection laws in the EU. There's also an AI Act that is being discussed. Have transparency laws, data portability, and participate in initiatives that are already out there. So I'd like to invite you to think more about your concerns and also the benefits of AI, because it's not all bad. But I think we do need to keep in mind that there are problematic areas that need to be discussed with students, but also with fellow faculty and potentially also organizations whose tools you're using to go into that dialogue and understand what the tool does and where it falls short, so that you can ensure that, for example, students are represented, faculty are represented, that diverse opinions are represented, and that we are very aware of where some of those biases might come in. That was the activity. And if you have any questions or want to talk more about it, or didn't write down the links to the slides, or want to have access to the recording but might not remember after the session where you can get it from, then please do feel free to contact me. I'm also still very early in my journey of exploring AI in the context that I work in. So Teresa and I, we work on a task force for digital ethics in regards to the use of portfolios. And so we are increasingly thinking about, well, what does AI impact? What impact does AI have there? Are portfolios now actually going to be a better way for assessment? Because as one of you said earlier, if you know the writing of a student and suddenly you get something completely different, you might be able to spot it more easily. And so we are all exploring what is happening, where the journey might go. And so there's a lot of trial and error involved. And I'd love to hear more what you're trying, what strategies are working for you in the coming month. And maybe next year we'll have a follow-on session where we can come back and get together and see if those strategies have changed, because of course the technology is also changing so rapidly. And so I'd like to thank you for coming along to this session today, and would like to hand it all back to Cheryl now to close us off on time.
Thank you so much, Kristina. Wow, what a powerful and engaging presentation that you provided. You gave a great introduction to AI and gave all of the different things to consider. And I appreciate the multiple ways that you gave us to interact and to discuss this topic. Thank you all for participating with Kristina in this important subject. And I know there's more to come. I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of the day and continue to enjoy the remaining parts of the conference. So that will end it for this session. I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you very much.